traditionally the European view of human origins was an adoption of a version of the ancient African view. And the traditional European view of human origins is what they adopted from Hebrew culture in the Old Testament, or in the Genesis. The story of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve. But in the modern sense, the modern Europeans have, for the most part, refused and denied and rejected their former traditional European perspective on human origins. And so the modern European view on human origins is what they like to call a scientific. They like to call it a scientific view. And they like to suggest this archaeological and anthropological and all these things. All right, and as they talk about their modern European scientific view of human origins, they would try to suggest that this ancient African view, that the traditional European view, that these former views they try to suggest were mythological, that it was mythology, that it was legend, and so on and so forth. All right, but there's some innate racism that's part of their modern European view. That this modern European view that they carry is a view that comes out of the 19th century. And coming out of the 19th century is really based upon Darwinism. And Darwinism's idea in the 19th century was really an attempt to deal with some of the revelations that some of the leading European political nationalists became aware of at the beginning of the 19th century. For instance, when we're talking about Napoleon in the 1790s, Napoleon invaded Egypt in the 1790s. And when he came into Egypt and saw the wonders of Egypt in the 1790s, it blew his mind, because at that same time the French were involved in enslaving Africans all throughout the Caribbean. And of course we're familiar with the Haitian Revolution that shortly pursued Napoleon's invasion of Egypt. But once Napoleon came into Egypt and saw the wonders of Egypt, it shook up the European world. That report of what existed in Egypt really shook up the European world. And the European world really had to come to grips with the idea that the Africans, were a magnificent people prior to them becoming enslaved. But not all of the Europeans were inclined to accept that perspective. And so they had their scientists begin to delve with questions other than their traditional view of human origins. What could be another reason? What could be another perspective on this whole question of how humans originate? And so this is what they came up with, was Darwin's theory of evolution. But in truth, Darwin's theory of evolution really stopped at the primate. That Darwin himself, Darwin's theory of evolution itself argues that life in this universe begins with the cell. That there was no existence on Earth, that the Earth was covered with water, and that in that massive ocean of water, that there just happened to occur a life form in the form of a cell. You're scientists, so you know this theory. And so they say, the Darwinists say that the cell and that all life evolves out of this original cell. And they say that the cell evolved into the plant, and that the plant in the ocean evolved into a fungus, and that the fungus in the ocean evolved into the fish. And so here we're saying that all of these complex life forms that exist, Darwinism basically says that they evolved out of the cell, the plant, and ultimately the fungus, or the germ, a germ. This boy is helping with the science here. And so from this germ or fungus, they say in this ocean evolved the fish. And out of this fish in the ocean, they say evolved the amphibian. And out of the amphibian, they say, Darwin said, evolved the reptile. And then out of this reptile, as this reptile made his way onto land, it said that this reptile evolved into a lowercase mammal. And that this lowercase mammal evolved into what became eventually the primate. And really, this is where Darwin's theory of evolution stops. Darwin's theory of evolution stopped with the primate. Not because, well, they argue not because Darwin didn't see any other logical explanations beyond the primate, but they'd like to say that Darwin's wife was a Christian, a born-again Christian, and that to avoid upsetting her beliefs and creating havoc in the household, that he was respectful to her Christian beliefs and that he didn't extend his theory to what they say his logical explanation would be. But there were archaeologists and anthropologists that came after Darwin that are known as social Darwinists. These are called social Darwinists. These are just archaeologists that took on the theory after Darwin. And these social Darwinists that came after Darwin, it's they that began to suggest that the primate actually evolved into the African. And so that's why when we're talking about anthropologists and archaeologists, whenever they're talking about African culture, you know how they describe African culture. The archaeologists and the anthropologists, they refer to African culture as primitive. Why do they consider it primitive? When they call African culture primitive, they're suggesting that this African culture evolved out of the primate culture, the monkey culture, the chimpanzee culture. All right? And so part of Darwin's theory of evolution is that as species evolve, that they become more intelligent. That's part of Darwin's theory of evolution. And likewise, as the social Darwinists took on the theory, they also suggested that as humans evolved out of the primate, that humans took on just a little bit of intelligence with every stage of evolution. So they suggest that the African has just a little more intelligence than the primate. That's why they call the African's culture primitive. All right? The social Darwinists said that out of the African evolved the Asians. And so social Darwinists say that the Asians' intelligence picked up a little further, but they say that human intelligence reaches its highest stage, its most advanced stage, the stage that it can no longer advance beyond any more, is in the form of the Caucasian. And so this is what the modern European view of human origin is all about, and this is what the whole educational game, not just in America, in the world, it's a worldwide teaching right now that's really not just designed to affect African people, although it grossly affects African people probably the most by suggesting that we are, or African people are, the most inferior. But it also affects anyone that is a human, because what it does is it shakes up and creates perhaps, or from an African perspective, a false sense of origin. A false sense of origin. Alright? And so this perspective is almost 180 degrees opposite from what the traditional ancient African view had to present. And although Egypt is not the oldest African culture on the continent, Egypt has the oldest deciphered literature in the world. That there is no culture in the world that has an older deciphered literature than that which exists in ancient Egypt. And so when we're talking about what the ancient Egyptians said about human origins, they have a recorded record of their view of human origins, and in fact their entire culture was set up to consistently, persistently remind humans as to what is the human connection to the universe, and ultimately to a divine, intelligent, supreme creator. That same divine, intelligent, supreme creator that the modern European scientific, archaeological perspective of human origins and life origins would ultimately reject. They don't say that a creator created the cell. They say that the cell just happened in the ocean one day.